Hi everyone, so my name's Max, and today we're going to be going over how to make the most out of your mobile GPUs, how to optimize them, just some techniques that we can use. But why should you trust me? So I used to work at Money Eyes, I was the lead tech artist there. I do a lot of profiling and optimization, a lot of engine profiling. But the important thing is, this is our game, Wanderer: The Fragments of Fate. It's a VR game on a MetaQuest 2, which is not very powerful. It's a couple of years old, and it's a VR title, which means it's already got a lot of performance issues to begin with. So how do we make the most out of our mobile GPUs? So I just want to start with some vocab. Shader complexity, right? What is shader complexity? It is how complicated is it to calculate the color of a pixel. So different materials will have different complexities. If you take water, for example, which has translucency, it has refraction, it's going to be a lot more complicated to render than a rock, which is very static, there's not much going on compared to water. We'll get further into this, but we'll just go over some vocab so we're all on the same page. So a draw call. When we want to render something onto the screen, the CPU says to the GPU, we're going to render this mesh. Here's the vertices, here's the triangles. This is the position that we want to render. This is all the information. And that's what the draw call is. Again, we'll go over all of this in a minute, just getting a basic framework and understanding for everyone. Next, we have the triangle count. So every mesh on screen is made out of triangles. So the more triangles that we have, the more detailed we can make our meshes. So if we have a sphere, for example, the more triangles that we have in the sphere, the smoother the sphere will be. So as we remove triangles from the sphere will become a lot more jagged, and lower quality, but it's a lot easier for the GPU to actually render. So jumping back to shader complexity. So to optimize this, we have to make a couple design decisions, unfortunately. We have to keep in mind that this is a mobile device. We are not working on a PlayStation, this isn't a PC, so we have to taper our expectations as such. So we have to, so we can fake a lot of things, but ultimately we have to understand that this isn't going to be using full PBL workflows. We will have to adjust this according to our device that we're working for. And we can get quite creative with this. We can fake roughness. We don't need to use full cube maps. This doesn't need to be fully realistic, but we just need to give the idea that this object is shiny and there's some light coming off of it. We can fake windows with cube maps. Maybe it's not a translucent window, it's fully opaque, but we can give the illusion that there's something behind this wall, something happening there, to give this illusion of translucency without paying for the full cost of it, right? So if we look at this example, on the left here is our PC, our PlayStation build for our Wanderer game. And on the right here is our mobile version. So what we decided to do, we made everything in the game fully rough. And that was a design decision we made. It makes it very flat, but it optimizes the shaders tenfold. It's a huge optimization that we made. But again, it takes away from the appearance of it. It's a design decision. So here's a couple numbers as well. So for PC, for PlayStation, we're using 813 instructions for a basic object. So like table, for example, I think this was. Compared to mobile, we brought that down to 48. So just by implementing our own custom methods for how we create and how we render objects, and ultimately removing full PBR workflows, implementing things in different ways, we're able to bring this and optimize it thoroughly for a mobile device. Unreal also has a great view mode for shader complexity, which we brought it down to almost completely green. Anything red, white is quite bad, but we brought it into the green zone, which is really wonderful. So the next thing I want to talk about is precomputed visibility. So in video games, there's two ways of deciding whether something's on screen, whether we want to actually render it. So we have frustum culling, which is whether or not it's in the view frustum of the player. So if anything's behind you, anything's to the side, we know that we don't need to render it, it's behind us. The second thing is occlusion culling. If something is behind a wall, we need to decide, can we actually see this? Do we need to render this object that's behind the wall? Ideally not, because we can't see it. And that's what occlusion culling is. It's figuring out if we can see this object behind other objects. And while we can do this for mobile devices, if we can avoid it, then we can take some pressure off of the GPU, and we can use that in other areas. So precomputed visibility is about making cells, making different boxes throughout the level, and each of these boxes contain information of what can we see when we're inside of this box. So as you move through the level, you enter a different box, you enter a different cell, and we're now removing, we have this list of objects that we see, and we can avoid everything else. So we're no longer having to check for every single object in our frustum, we just care about this one list that we have. So this only works for static meshes, however. Anything that's movable, such as like a weapon or anything grabbable, we can't use that, and we will have to rely on real-time occlusion culling. However, we take a lot of pressure off the GPU with precomputed visibility. So if we have a look at this example, this is from one of our levels. This is one of the cells. So we have a lot of cells, and all it's doing is it's just sending out breakcasts to say, this is what we can see from this box. I think this takes about an hour maybe to fully bake out the precomputed visibility of this level, but the gains that we get out of it is huge. The next thing I want to have a talk about is hierarchical level of detail, or HLODs. So typically what we do is, for every single mesh that we have, we'll have for like a table, we'll have some chairs, we'll have the table itself, we'll have plates, we'll have cutlery. And each single item is its own mesh. And each single mesh is its own draw call. And a draw call is when we send the information for that mesh from the CPU to the GPU. And we want to try and reduce that as much as we can. So what we can do is, for that table, that chair, those plates, we can glue all of them together into one big mesh. And that's great, because now everything's just one draw call. And we can go further. We can make our own material. We can bake out textures for everything. So now this new mesh that we've made has its own custom material. It's one single draw call for the entire table set, right? So we can, if we have a look here. So if you take a building, for example, it's made of 146 different draw calls, 146 different objects that we can then HLOD and make a brand new mesh, brand new material, brand new textures to drastically reduce the draw calls. So taking a step back, Quest 2, our draw call budget was about 300 to 500 depending on the scene. So if you take that into consideration, that's a huge optimization. But what we don't want to do when we do this is we don't want to degrade the quality of our game up close. we want nearby assets to maintain their quality. So what we can do is, instead of rendering this new mesh that we've made up close, we only render it when we take a step back. We're far away, so we don't really care about the quality too much. So that's what HLODs are. As we take a step back, we swap to larger combined meshes, and as we get closer, then we go back to our original meshes at full quality, at their original materials, and it's also a very nice workflow so that designers can go through, they can move meshes in the scene, we can change set dress really easily. If we, for example, for that table, if we wanted to move a knife slightly to one side, we'd have to send it back to artists, we'd have to go through this whole pipeline of basically creating the mesh again. It's a whole lot of work just to move a knife to one side. HLODs, we just rebake them. In the scene, we move them to one side, we rebake the entire mesh. So, moving on to instancing. Now, instancing is a similar idea. What we're trying to do is we're trying to reduce draw calls. We're trying to reduce the information sent from CPU to the GPU. So, typically what happens, if you have a field and you've got a lot of grass that you're trying to render, what will typically happen is the CPU will tell the GPU, here's the information about this grass, of this single blade of grass, and here is the position that we want to render it at. And then the GPU will go off and it will render this single blade of grass. And the CPU says, now here's the information for this other blade of grass. Here's the same vertices, the same triangles, the same materials, just in different position. So we spend so much time normally just passing through the exact same information with just different transformations, different positions. So instead, what we can do is we can send the vertices, the triangles, all that information once, and we just provide a list of different positions and different transformations that we can then get the GPU to render all at once, all at the same time. So that's one draw call for an entire field, right? So if we have a look here, this entire forest is instanced. And Unreal is really good for this because the foliage tool that Unreal has is automatically instanced. Everything that you paint with the foliage tool is instanced. And there's actually two kinds of instancing that Unreal supports. There's instanced static meshes, which will log together as a group, or hierarchical instance static meshes, which is what the foliage tool uses, so that you're still getting typical level of detail. So as you move around, the meshes will degrade. So you're not paying for high triangle counts, while still getting the optimization from instancing. Now, the thing with this is, because all we're doing is we're taking pressure off of the GPU, that if we optimize the shader complexity really well, what that actually means is we can actually have a couple more triangles on screen if we really want it. And that's really good. So it's a fine balance between we optimize in one sector and then what does that allow us to do in another. However, there's some implications here. Unfortunately, a lot of these tools do have their own trade-offs. Think about HLODs, for example. Typically, what would happen if you're far away and you're rendering just the corner of one building? What's going to happen is, normally, we frustum color most of that building, and we only render the meshes that are on screen. But if you HLODed it, and you're rendering just a huge mesh, because you're seeing that one small corner of the building, you are now having to render that entire building. So generally, HLODs are actually going to be increasing your triangle count, depending on the quality of the HLODs that you make. Obviously, you can, when you make the HLODs, you can create them with a very small triangle count. But again, it's a balance between quality and performance and how you want to handle that. A similar thing for instancing. So because instancing comes through as one huge draw call, we're passing in all of this information, it's a lot harder for the system to do occlusion queries on this because we're passing everything through at the same time. So there's some balances there, and that's where you can do things such as auto-instancing for some mobile devices, depending on their support. But that does have further performance overhead if you want to pay for that. But that's where it can actually start to do some occlusion queries for you. But it's just whether or not you're able to pay for that performance upfront. If you are making instances manually, ideally you try and keep the clusters small so that you're still able to get some vague idea of occlusion culling by keeping all of those instances together and in close quarters. So just to go over what we've gone over today, shader complexity, the cheaper and the less complicated materials are, the faster it is to calculate the color of these pixels. And precomputed visibility, we bake out all of these occlusion queries into small cells, into small boxes, that we, as we move through the level, we just change, and we don't have to do all of this real runtime occlusion queries. HLODs, we merge all of these assets together to reduce draw calls. We reduce the CPU telling all the GPU to render these triangles, render these vertices at this position. And we do the same for instancing. So we can use these to really take a lot of the bandwidth off the GPU, and we can use that to prioritize where we want to actually spend our budget. Again, we can, the cheaper the shader complexity is, maybe we can increase the try count, we can make things look a little bit nicer. So that's the majority of my talk there. If anyone has any questions. Sorry, I rushed it a little bit. Does anyone have any questions? Yes.
You used an acronym with a P in it at the start. I don't know what that P something P board was.
PBR.
PBR.
Oh, PBR.
What's that?
That's physically based rendering.
Okay.
So if you're going for a stylized approach, then that's not PBR. But if you're trying to make it very realistic, if you want, yeah.
Like real-time lighting and stuff is part of that as well, or is it just the object?
Yeah, kind of. But if you want roughness, if you want ambient occlusion, if you want it to be as realistic as possible, that's typically a PBR workflow, physically based rendering.
I don't quite understand how HLODs work. Is there like a real-time thing? Because you did mention...
Yeah, so this is all done beforehand.
Right.
So before we package the game, we bake out HLODs. So what it does is we make clusters. So we get all of our assets, and it will automatically cluster meshes together based on their proximity. And then we bake all of them out into their new meshes. And we give it, the distance that we want to transition them at, and how we want to handle the materials.
So it's different from normal LODs, which is like per asset. This is like
So it's
specific with C.
Yeah.
And is that like a tool you built, or is it like an
It's an Unreal. Yeah.
Oh wow.
Yeah. So it's a lot of this is pretty plug and play ish. It's all of this stuff is in Unreal Engine. It can all be transferred across to other engines, Godot or Unity, but it's a focus on Unreal Engine, and a lot of it is pretty plug and play for the most part, but also letting you dive quite deep into it as well.
Do you still have normal LODs, or do you just use
Yep. So you use for anyone that's not aware, so level of detail LODs. So as you move further away from a mesh, we decimate and we have a lower try count as you're further away, because we don't need the quality to be as intense when you're far away.
And HLODs work together?
Yeah, so the LODs of the normal mesh work as usual. until when you get to a certain point that you decided we're going to transition to HLODs at this point. Then the HLOD kicks in. We're no longer rendering those other meshes. We're only rendering this HLOD now. And then you can also load an HLOD. So then as you get further away from the HLOD, that also uses normal mods.
And HLODs are usually for static environment objects.
Yeah. Yeah. You can't, no movable assets for an HLOD.
Why'd you perhaps choose to say not use something like Nanite? Is there a downside to that?
Yeah, so, well, it's getting there, but it's not quite there for mobile devices yet. I haven't investigated 5.6 in Unreal Engine too much, but especially in VR, where you're having to, you've got two lenses, you're rendering the tri-count's basically doubled. You can instance them between the lenses, but there's just a lot of overhead that adding Nanite on top of that isn't really quite feasible yet, unfortunately. Yeah.
Was there anything you couldn't add to the mobile port?
In terms of what, sorry? So
like a material or something that you just weren't able to?
The biggest one for me is probably the water. We had to make our water not only opaque but also unlit, just because of the sheer cost of translucency, and they're on screen in such large areas that they cover the screen so much that we did have to make them unlit. I did a whole system for like fake reflections, so it's got some other system, but it's not the same ultimately. But system-wise, everything's kind of there. We've still got because we've got like bottle shaders, so you can have liquid in a bottle and do all these systems. That's all on mobile, but they're just not. Most of it's just not at the same quality as PC. Yeah.
Do you make any inspiration from the optimization things?
Yeah, definitely. We spend a lot of time just going through old papers and just trying to see how these people did it, or just going through and seeing what we can do there to try and just take as much pressure off as we can. Yeah. Is there anything in particular that you were? Yeah. It was yeah. We won't get into that right now. Yeah.
It's not really complicated.
No. Oh, you can. Yeah. You go.
Okay. So, because you're making the game scalable across mobile and also PC. So, how did you handle that? Like while working on the same project, did you have to have a system to spot the shaders or materials? So,
Unreal's got. If you have a look at Unreal's material editor, there's a thing called a feature level switch. So you can say, hey, on PC, we do this material. On mobile, we use this material. So that's pretty built in. I did some hacky stuff the other week for going between Quest 2 and Quest 3, because we wanted Quest 3 to be really nice, and Quest 2 struggled a little bit. But yeah, there are systems in place to handle between PC and PC and mobile devices quite nicely.
For mobile VR, what frame rate do you guys target, and also how do you handle like thermal software?
Yeah. So we, in an ideal world, would be on Quest 2 would be at 72 FPS. But we use a thing called application spacewalk, which means we're actually rendering at 36 FPS, and then it's kind of like an AI-generated frame in between that kind of scales it up to 72 FPS. So the game's technically running at 36, but it feels like 72. Thermal throttling is just kind of, we just let it do as it as it was handling. Ideally, we don't want it to be thermal throttling too much because that uses more power and it's got other implications. But it is a balance.
Very cool.
Thank you.
I saw the shared complexity profile you had up there.
Yeah.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Can you use any other profiling tools for like they try hard open?
Some other good ones for materials in particular, or just in general. Yeah. There's a lot of like stat. This is more Unreal side than stuff, but in Unreal there's a lot of I think there's stat, RHI, stat, scene rendering. There's just this long list of different stats that you can see the full try counts, draw calls, kind of see what's happening there. I think that's probably the best way of doing it. Actually, the other one is they do have a view mode for this in mobile as well now. It's quite recent. Quad overdraw. So yeah, let's get into this. So okay, I'll speed run this. Quad overdraw is so. Any other questions before I get into this tangent? Basically, if you have a really small triangle that you're rendering kind of far away or really small triangle, what often ends up happening is you actually render 4 pixels instead of just 1, and then any other triangles around it, you kind of render around it. So you end up in a scenario where you're rendering pixels multiple times just because they're a small triangle kind of off in the distance. So it's I don't have a nice solution around it, but something to be aware of. Small triangles can actually result in you rendering multiple pixels. The same pixel multiple times, which you want to avoid because you don't need to be doing it, but it's just a byproduct of how things happen, unfortunately. That makes sense. Yeah. Cool.